Hi, my name is Matt. I'm with StrongLoop. So today I'm going to talk to you about the iOS and Android mobile API and SDKs integration into LoopBack. So you heard both Bert and Raymond talk about more of the internals of the code and StrongLoop itself as well as StrongOps. But today I'm going to talk more about the API layer, specifically here at interacting at this LoopBack layer, which of course is a middle API tier designed specifically for mobile interactions. The good part is, especially if you're a mobile developer for iOS or Android, we have native SDKs for both iOS and Android, of course, as well as RESTful endpoints if you want to access directly through HTML. So I'm not going to get too deep into the Strong Node CLI or SLC, nor am I going to get too much into the StrongOps. I'll touch on it as we go through and build the demo, but more specifically, it'll be about the integrations. So you can kind of see, of course, how these three products fit together. Once again, we'll be focusing on the LoopBack API middle tier, which allow you to stand up your own API backend, connect it to a MongoDB or Oracle or SQLite data store, and effectively run your own mobile backend as a system or as a service, although it's on software. So you can run it, of course, on your machine or in the cloud or on your mother's Linux machine if you need. So before we get into the actual code, I'm just going to give a brief overview of kind of the value of having control over your own mobile backend. So of course, StrongLoop in our Node.js middle tier LoopBack sits here in the middle of the stack, connecting to clients, specifically embedded devices such as mobile applications, iOS, Android. Of course, if you're on top of a PhoneGap implementation or even a mobile web, you can access directly the HTTP RESTful JSON request. Of course, you're going to stand that on top of some type of platform. It may be on your own hardware, or it may be on infrastructure as a service provided. The powerful thing about StrongLoop, especially on LoopBack, is that really LoopBack runs anywhere that Node runs. So if you can run Node-V to get the version, you can install our CLI through NPM, and you can be off to the races. So there's a couple challenges, though, that I'd like to point out, especially on the value of having control over your own mobile backend as a service. There's a lot of providers for mobile backends as a service, such as Parse, Kinvey, even Amazon has components on that. However, if you're abstracted from the lower substrate or the actual machines that are running your API, you can run into some problems. Specifically, if your middle tier is opaque to you, it's very difficult to find bottlenecks. Oftentimes, the ability to either introspect into the actual stack itself is limited because you don't actually have access beyond the API tier. So you can only sit there and look at the RESTful request time response coming back and forward. Additionally, if you need to spin up additional nodes, so for instance, if your mobile application is doing a marketing event, you can't preload or pre-configure your infrastructure in order to handle the load that's coming forward. Nor can you, if you hit a spike, let's say, by some organic hit, and your application goes hyperbolic, you can't actually have control over spinning up additional nodes or managing the actual trafficking yourself. Additionally, if you need additional features in your backend, so for instance, if you need to do some specific mutex component on a data store, or you need to be able to add a feature that's not provided by the service, you're effectively locked out of that because it's actually the service sitting on another person's cloud, of course, and you can't actually get access to the core itself. The value of having StrongLoop, specifically LoopBack API middle tier, is that you have control over this entire middle tier. So for instance, if you needed to add additional features or functionality, let's say you needed to add access to Bluetooth Low Energy, or you wanted to get access to another data store, or you wanted to migrate off of your existing data store, you can access the full library of NPM modules in order to do this. And of course, you can also scale up and improve the infrastructure. Okay, so that's kind of the big overview. Like I said today, we're really going to focus on the mobile SDK integration with iOS and specifically Android here later today. Before I get too deep into it, just a brief little architecture diagram about how the configuration works. Mobile SDK, of course, sitting on the client side. Let's go ahead and jump into a little more detail here. And then, of course, the LoopBack API servicing this. So today I'll walk through, we'll build a quick mobile iOS application. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to follow along with the process, we've got several sample apps on github.com/strongloop and github.com/strongloop-community. But today I'm going to go ahead and show you how to build a quick mobile application in native iOS and integrate with the LoopBack SDK. We're going to go ahead and define an LB REST adapter. This is going to be the endpoint at which we're going to touch the actual IP address for our service layer or API layer. We'll, of course, stand that up on the back end here on my local machine. And then, of course, I'm going to go ahead and touch a couple model objects or LB repositories, LB model repositories, which are essential model representations of your data and content. Since you're sitting on top of the LoopBack API and SDK, you get a bunch of features and functionality pretty much for free. So you get CRUD right out of the box. So you can do create, read, update, and delete. You also get filtering and search. So that allows you to do filtering against your models. For instance, if you wanted to find a product that had an inventory less than 22, or sort your inventory or your price, let's say, from greater than to least than on the request response that comes back, as well as then maybe throttle that response down to 5 items or 5 components in order to make your mobile application fast and responsive. The mobile developer and the mobile application engineer is actually in charge of this, so that they can actually manage that throttling, as well as have some opportunity to intercept back to the back end. And of course, they can stand up a demo or a dev box on their local machine so that they can continue on iteration without having to worry about getting into the service or sysops configuration. So in addition, of course, to having the LB model repository objects on the mobile client side that give you access to CRUD and remoting, custom remote features, of course, there's going to be a mirror component down in the LoopBack Node.js API tier sitting inside your Node application or your Node server. We're not going to get too deep into that, but I'll go ahead and you'll see it as we stand it up because we want to go ahead and stand up our own implementation. Additionally, since you're standing on top of the LoopBack product components, you also get StrongOps go ahead and built into the application. So when we do an SLC LB create here later today, you'll see that we automatically have StrongOps, so we can actually do performance measurement inside the Node application itself. So for instance, if we wanted to understand more about why our RESTful response was latent or had high latency in the request, we can actually introspect in and maybe take a look and see that maybe it's the data connector that's connected to MongoDB or SQLite, which is very valuable for mobile developers who are always chasing that, that performance for the user experience, trying to reduce that latency in that experience. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to go ahead and stand up our little mobile application here, and we'll get into some code and go ahead and integrate it in. So first, let's kick out of the terminal and go straight into, or get out of the PowerPoint, and we'll go straight into the terminal. Let's see, is that clear enough? Yep. So like I said earlier, the best part about StrongLoop, LoopBack, and all of our products is that any machine that can run Node, that would be Node-V, you can stand up the LoopBack mobile API middle tier. And it's never been actually easier to install LoopBack itself than it has, especially over the last 3 weeks since we've provided an NPM package. So if you were starting from scratch, the easiest way to get started is to go ahead and do an NPM install. And we're going to go ahead and do strong CLI and then -G. And so that'll install it globally inside my NPM repository. And so then I can access the SLC command line. So I'm going to go ahead and back that out. I've already, of course, installed the StrongLoop SLC. And so I can already go ahead and just do a quick SLC version. Oops. There we go. SLC's version, make sure I'm up to date on it. So let's go ahead and we'll create our quick mobile backend here in order to go ahead and start with our mobile application development. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a LoopBack project, SLC LB project, and we'll call it mobile server. It'll go ahead and create the mobile server scaffolding for us. Of course, it's standing on top of Node itself, so it's going to install the packages that we need, both for security, the API layer, dependencies such as Express, as well, of course, is our LoopBack API middle tier, as well as the data juggler ORM that allows us to connect to MongoDB or Oracle database in the data store service, as well as like effectively giving a scaffolding that makes it easy to kind of extend and navigate and manage it. So we'll go ahead and get that installed. Let our NPM repositories install down. And then after we do that, we'll go ahead and actually take a look. There's our mobile server. We'll just cd into mobile server. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and create our models. So back to the original diagram that kind of had our customer, product, as well as locations model for our application, we'll go ahead and strut those up so that we can access them from the mobile client. So that'll be a piece of cake. It's SLC LB model. So we're going to define a model here. And in this case, I'm going to leave it schemaless, which means I'm not going to define the actual parameters and components. So if you saw Rach's talk earlier, he talked a little bit more about static defining your models versus keeping them open. Since I'm coming from the mobile developer perspective, I want to make sure and keep them open because I want to make sure and be able to add any parameters I want to the model as I'm going through my dev cycle, potentially locking it down later. So SLC LB model, let's do product. SLC LB model, we'll do customer. SLC LB model, and let's do a location as well. So now that we've gone ahead and created them, we'll just do an SLC install. Should be very fast since we've already installed our required JSON packages. And now effectively we're ready to go. So an important note, since I'm already in SLC commands and I've already have my StrongLoop package, if I wanted to turn on performance monitoring, it's very easy. I can just go SLC strong ops. And it'll go ahead and ask me for my configuration for my email as well as my authentication credentials. And that way it'll go ahead and just track the actual mobile backend for me automatically. So if at a later date I decide that I needed to do some performance tuning, it's already configured, it's already there, sitting there, measuring that application server performance for me. So let's go ahead and let's run our application. So of course it sits on top of Node, so it's very easy. I'm going to run it a little bit different though. Since we installed with SLC, we also have access to Node Inspector, which of course is a node debugger. That's a very valuable aspect of the component because it allows you to go ahead and debug backend if you go and extend it. So for this first run, I'll go ahead and run it with the SLC debugger. And for that, instead of doing run, I'll do debug and app.js. So it's going to go ahead and run my app.js file. Let's go ahead and capture our port and configuration here. And then let's go ahead and open a browser here and go check and make sure that everything's closed. So I'm running here with a virtual IP here. See if we can increase that a little bit. And so I know that I'm up and going. I can also, of course, check out the Explorer. Explorer is a great way to go ahead and kind of verify your API and endpoints. Let's go ahead and extend this out so you can see it. And then, for instance, if I wanted to just go ahead and take a look and see what the products inventory is, I can already go ahead and just do a get products. Of course, there's no data and no information right now in my mobile backend, or in my LoopBack backend. And of course, it's sitting on my machine, but of course, after I go ahead and through my initial development stage, of course, I can deploy it on any cloud platform that we want, whether it be Amazon, Rackspace, Heroku, once again, anything that really runs Node. So we've got the basics here. I can go ahead and try it out, get my filter response. Of course, there's no data in my backend server. It's actually just running in memory right now. So let's go ahead and, since we're here, we can also go ahead and, since we're running, of course, in debug mode, just to give you a view of that, we'll go ahead and just tack on the Node Inspector viewer. See, where was I? I was running in .8080. That's the port that's Node Inspector is running off of. So we'll go ahead and run the Node Inspector component here. So of course, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and introspect into my applications, and I could set breakpoints if I wanted to go debug or maybe extend even my backend. Very valuable component, especially as you go through your development cycle on the backend. You may be pulling in additional NPM modules, maybe if you're doing social aggregation like for the Twitter API, or you're doing some special OAuth configuration. That way you have access to it. So we're not really going to focus on that today. I think it's time for us to get into the mobile client and start putting in the SDKs so we can build our mobile application. So to start that process, I'll go ahead and kick off a very simple application that I have here. And this is a super simple application. It's an existing app scaffolding here, and essentially got a table view, and it has some create, update, delete, inject buttons. And so we need to go ahead and add our SDK to this application, and then of course hook in our request to go ahead and get the model functionality that we need. So we'll start first by pulling in the actual SDK itself. So I actually went ahead and downloaded the framework. Of course, you can get it at strongloop.com/mobile-iOS. And the native iOS SDK is ready to download. You can also go to our GitHub repo as well if you want to take a look and see how it works under the hood. But I've already downloaded it, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull it into my application file here. Let's see. got it here on my desktop. There we are. So I'll just drag and drop the framework straight in. Finish. So now that I have the SDK embedded, let's go ahead back to our view here. Specifically, we'll be working inside this the view controller. It's a very simple application. I'll go ahead and include my LoopBack backend. So I've included the top-level header file. And now, first step, if you remember back to the diagram, effectively we want to go ahead and do the REST adapter. So that means we want to define the endpoint in which we're going to, where our API lives and exists. And so that's very easy. So actually, we'll define an adapter here. So I've got a very simple property. We'll put it up here. Piece of cake. In this case, I'm just doing a simple lazy instantiation to define an LB adapter. So actually, I'm looking at localhost, but if you remember earlier, I'm actually pointing to this 3333 IP address. So we'll go ahead and drop that in. And of course, I'm looking at the API endpoint here. So of course, we can also verify that our API is sitting out here. Just drop it into the browser. There we go, API. And of course, I need to give it the actual endpoint of the model as well. So we'll just go ahead and query the products component, which of course is empty. OK, perfect. Oh, let me go ahead and fix that little guy right there. That'll give us problems later. And so now, really effectively, we can go back to our application, and you can see here that, let's go ahead and open this guy up this way so you can take a look. So you can see that we have our create, our update, delete, and they reference the actions here on our iOS native Objective-C. So we're going to go ahead and come in. We'll just extend those out. Let's hide that guy right there, come back to the main view. And so the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and extend a get models configuration. Just go ahead and pull the existing models out. So get models is, let's go ahead and brush that out. And so let's go ahead and just take a quick look here, so you can see what's going on here. So there's actually two mechanisms in which you can gain access. If you want to use an object model, you can. That means you can drop these LB models into an existing object infrastructure to add to it. Or if you want to, you can actually use the callback, the Lambda functional blocks. So it's kind of easier if we read from the bottom to the top here. So we're going to go ahead and define our model prototype here, our model repository. And that's, of course, going to reference the products endpoint that we have in our mobile application. All with success means that we're going to do a quick request for the back end. We're also going to define our load success blocks as well as our load error blocks. The load error block is going to let us know if, for instance, maybe the endpoint wasn't accessible, and the load success block is going to, of course, come back with an array of our model content, in which case I'm going to go ahead and put that into our table view and reload the table view. So let's go ahead and see if I can come back here. We'll go ahead and fill out the inject as well. So the inject model is very similar. It actually just happens to be calling a model with dictionary to insert the actual data into the back end. In this case, I want my model refresh to do, let's see, I defined it as get models. So let's go ahead and hook that in. And I'll also hook in a quick delete. Take a quick look at that so you can take a look. Oh, there we go. So here's my delete method here. Once again, functional blocks. I'm actually going to call, check, and verify if the object exists first here on my find by ID. Call back up into success block. If success block hits, which is great, that means it was there. I'll go ahead and call a destroy with success on this model object that comes back. Let's do the same thing here. We want to do update an existing model. Very similar functional methodology and mechanism. Only difference is I'm going to call with success, and when it comes back, I'm going to go ahead and save back with success. So just a couple lines of code, and we're going to be able to go ahead and hook in our back end straight into our native Objective-C application. of course, save as well. Go ahead and save the model out for a new model that I'm creating and adding to it. So, piece of cake. So we're going to go ahead and run it here in the simulator. Oh, that's pretty chunky. Let's run it actually here. Let's see if I can't just scale it down actually. There we go. So let's go ahead and open this up so we can actually see the request come across. So the first thing we want to do is we want to call our inject, go ahead and add some data to the backend repository. Just hit our refresh, so of course you can see our backend's filled with data and content. Now of course if I bound my LoopBack middle tier to MongoDB or another data store, then it would of course persist in that layer itself, allowing me to stand up my backend and have a persistent layer. Of course, since I'm sitting on top of StrongOps, then of course I can also see the performance impact of how that RESTful API comes across the wire, hits the middle backend tier, and then of course it goes and injects into the data store. So we've gone ahead and done that, so let's refresh their data table. Oh, one last thing. I definitely need to make sure and unhook my calls on my table view. Of course, this is just the table view delegate, the UI table view delegate, so that it'll actually render. Call our refresh, get our product components back from the server. We'll go ahead and create another product using our product callback into the SDK. And we can also, of course, update the data itself. So if we wanted to modify a model and then push it back to the server, really it's just about 4 or 5 lines of code to do that in Objective-C. And then, of course, be able to call a delete on top of a model, push that back to the mobile backend as well, and of course, all the way down to the data store tier. So a very straightforward, very simple application, but I think it kind of illustrates like the ease at which you can actually integrate a backend API, even though, of course, you could call RESTful request yourself. That SDK tries to bring it up to the developer so that we can go ahead and add some accessibility and make it easier to access the backend content. Of course, we also support push services as well, of course, filter and find. And then additionally, we also have access to remote methods. So for instance, if I wanted to extend this product object, maybe and put a tax method on top of all products or calculate all inventory, then I can add that on top of the actual product object itself. And then that means that the product object can then call get total inventory across all products, do that on the mobile backend and respond back, kind of keep all that heavy lifting off my mobile client, but still make it accessible for mobile developers to go ahead and move their way into the back end, especially with JavaScript and NPM. So before I kind of wrap it up, let's go ahead and just do another quick example here. Let's go ahead and let's do a quick, let's do a filter example. So filtering is pretty cool. This is a very similar application, actually. Just a simple one. And by the way, if you want to check any of these out, you can find references to them on the LoopBack mobile/iOS page, as well as, of course, inside our GitHub repos. So we've got a bunch of little sample applications to kind of help you find your way through the application API. But in this case, we'll go ahead and run it. It's just a very simple application. And what we're doing in this case is we're actually calling specifically, well, let's go ahead and, I don't need to sit here and look at it this way. There we go. Let's call this remote repository component. Ooh, where are we going? Just lost myself in the request response. Actually, I think I'm looking at the wrong one. There we go. There we go. So we want to go ahead and filter our order request or our products, specifically our product components. And we want to filter on descending inventory, set it at the limit of 3. And so that way I can go ahead and get a sorted list coming back from the server. Let's go ahead and drop out of that view. We'll go ahead and get this application a little run. Oh. Do a request, get no filter. This actually just does the same request, and of course we'll do it here in ascending order and then in descending order as well. Making sure that we have a sorted list, and specifically, of course, throttle to the data and content that we're after, so we can kind of keep the request on the bandwidth down, so we're not just going to have to be stuck with whatever the server gives us on the request response. And of course, since it's on the mobile client, that means that the mobile client, of course, is toggling that so that it's in control, so it can maintain its performance and experience. All right, so that wraps it up. Let me just go ahead and point you to a couple pages here so you can kind of see a couple components, where to go. So of course, well, you already saw the demo. Oh, that's a good point. We can also pull up StrongOps here and take a look at that performance as well. But you can get started. It's very simple. Just go to the strongloop.com /mobile/iOS page. You can download the SDK, integrate it. Of course, to install SLC command line, it's very simple. It's an npm package. So that's going to be npm install-g strong-cli. And then, of course, we've got docs, of course, on strongloop.com. And, of course, our GitHub repo as well. So that does it for the iOS SDK. I'll be back here in just a little bit, and we'll talk about the Android SDK. You'll find that it has almost identical function signatures and methods, so that you can kind of keep a nice unified backend, have a unified mechanism for implementing the Android, and of course support both of the two most popular, powerful products on the market today, with a single API tier, of course on top of a node infrastructure that you can take and put wherever you want. So thank you very much for your time.